Tension rises between Joey and Vanessa. Joey tells Vanessa that she has to give something up, and she retorts, "Stop being sarcastic, Joey. It's starting to bother me." She suddenly wants to know where all this is coming from. The anger rose from an invisible fracture that Vanessa thought she had sealed with quiet compromises. For months, she gathered the remaining shards of trust after the shock named Doug, stacking them into a thin wall to hide an undeniable knowledge. The one who pushed that world over the ledge was Joey. She paid with self-censorship of feeling, with nights of silence stretched like unlit tunnels, with the strangling of every instinct to cry out whenever the final images of Doug flickered at the edge of her vision. She told herself that if she stood close to Joey, she could steer, she could break, she could make that darkness hesitate before it swallowed another soul. But every compromise has a border, and one day the man with the reassuring smile like a velvet-wrapped blade began to set conditions again. She had to give something up, he said. Some piece of memory, some relationship, some slice of freedom or integrity itself. Anything that could prove loyalty. Something inside Vanessa tightened, equal parts humiliation and revolt, as if she were signing a surrender before the one who had planted mines beneath her life. The anger did not detonate with sound. It spread like oil through cloth, soaking fire into every reason she had once used to justify her silence. She retraced the path of her choices. She remembered the night when smoke still clung to her hair, when news of the accident arrived like a short, soulless death notice. She remembered realizing that a grotesquely neat arrangement lay behind it all. The disappearing calls, the transfers revealed through a hairline crack in the system, the backstage faces that suddenly dodged her gaze. She assembled them like pieces of a horrific picture, and at the center stood Joey, not as a demon, but with the professional calm of a script doctor erasing redundant lines. Vanessa swore to keep the secret because she believed that staying near the hazard was better than being pushed to the edge, where she could control nothing. She believed she would one day wrench the wheel when he pressed too far. But that belief over time became a chain. Now Joey's new demand twisted the lock, forcing her to seal the rest of herself into a vault. Her silence was not empty. It was full of the sounds of calculation. She measured each breath before reacting, knowing every sign of defiance had a price. Joey never spoke plainly. He scattered hints, soft borders that looked like silk ribbons but were in fact fishing line. Painless at first touch and then slicing when pulled. Vanessa saw the road split into two. Continue the silence and endure another layer of depletion, or push back and accept a blaze that could incinerate everything she was trying to keep. In the struggle, a part of her wanted to smash the screen, to name the guilt, to ask whether the night in his eyes had ever thinned. Another part, cold and methodical, remembered that their private rooms rarely belonged to them alone. The walls at Fairmont Crest could eavesdrop. The casino where they hid in shadowed corners had more eyes and ears than tables. A young dealer with hands quick as sleight of hand had once watched Vanessa longer than necessary, as if trying to read subtitles appearing behind her eyes. And down another corridor, Marcel. Sun woven between forces she never had words enough to define. Paced with the gait of someone listening to the world through his heels. Certain arguments never end in the room. They breed copies that follow accidental hearers, then one day return as invoices. Vanessa began to build a fence to contain her own anger. She worked with fragments. A delayed email with innocuous content but coordinates to a meeting months ago. A camera as small as a button nested in a lampshade in the side room. Several copies of papers about anonymous contributions to a fund with an entrance known only to the officially faceless. Not to threaten Joey, not yet, but to keep a shelter for her rational side whenever the wounded half nearly dragged her under. She even considered approaching the dealer, the one who smiled as if he knew more than the cards he turned up. A good witness is someone who doesn't realize he is a witness until someone forces him to remember. And Marcel, with that gaze blending fondness and inherited calculation, was a variable she could not dismiss. If he had caught even a sliver of their quarrel, What would he do with it? Sell it to the highest bidder, bury it for a favor, or use it as bait to test the mother he never stopped doubting? Within Vanessa, betrayal was no longer a single act. It was an ecosystem, a food chain where everything was prey and hunter at once. She had betrayed her own perception when she spread a white cloth over the fact that Joey lit the fuse. Joey betrayed the tacit pact between them by setting conditions over what remained of her. Marcel might betray her if he saw gain larger than the flimsy loyalty that bound them. And at the deepest layer, Vanessa felt she betrayed Doug each time she chose silence. The tearing did not show as tears, but as micro-decisions. A nod slowed by half a beat, a hand withdrawn from a reaching shoulder, a night standing long before a mirror to see whether her eyes still reflected light. She understood that every decision would make a part of her fall away like paint flaking from damp walls, and her only task was to choose which piece to let go first. Joey sensed Vanessa's disobedience like a change of air pressure in the room. He lived by measuring the faintest variations in others, and he smelled, in that silence, the scent of a self-defense plan. To a man trained to walk tightropes between burning towers, every sign of resistance held opportunity and risk at once. He tightened his schedule around Vanessa, altered when he appeared, deftly moved crucial meetings to places that advantaged him. At the casino, he befriended the dealer, slid large tips across felt like plush reminders. In the dark, behind the bars, he said little but set many standards with a look. Vanessa caught the new rhythm and understood Joey was preparing a different game. If she betrayed him, he needed a firewall so she would char before touching the real vault. If she stayed silent, he needed to test how deep the well was that hid her hoard. Both, in different ways, were turning keys in each other's locks. Her anger, instead of exploding, became architecture. She rewrote her rules of living. Never remain too long in one room. Never repeat a habit enough to be recognized. Never trust doors with only one lock. She mapped an exit route not to flee but to know that, at all times, she had a choice. Having choice calmed her, and calm was a language Joey read the worst. Yet calm was also a double-edged blade, allowing her to hear the voice of guilt more clearly. Each night, as the city settled, she thought she heard Doug's shoes on the back stoop, the sigh he always let out before turning the key, the offbeat clink of metal after a day too long. She knew memory was playing its tricks, but when fed by silence, memory becomes a curse. She wasn't sure she could live under that curse forever without hurling it at someone that an unplanned variable slipped in. A snippet of talk from the dealer to a regular, drifting to the ear of a casino diarist, circling back to Marcel. That day Marcel stood at the edge of a hallway where light touched only half, blinking slowly as if to burn into his retina words no one had written. He hated being cast as outside, hated when grown-ups spoke in code and pretended he could not understand. If the quarrel between Joey and Vanessa had leaked to the dealer, it no longer belonged to them. Marcel could use it to take everyone's temperature. How would Joey react to exposure? Where would Vanessa cling when the secret she held turned to rumor? He began to transmit vague signals, telling someone unimportant that he was interested in a small stake in a chain of anonymous funds, hinting at an incomplete name, just enough to startle someone in Joey's network. Not to detonate, but to sound the depth. Vanessa felt the first ripples when a loosely connected partner abruptly postponed a meeting, citing security. She read, between the lines, a fear spreading, a nameless dread everyone could feel. She knew the balcony she stood on was no longer safe, that with a gentle shove she could be named as a link in a chain of guilt. Self-protection was no longer mere pragmatism. It became the only ethics she could cling to. She decided to shift focus from guarding the secret to controlling how it might surface. If someone had overheard the fight, they would hear the version that wounded her the least. She drafted a pruned line of truth. She knew too little to conclude anything about Doug. She stayed near Joey for fear that another force would push everything further. She held her silence to keep peace for those untouched. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the raft that might keep her afloat when the flood of rumor came. Hyper-attuned to movement, Joey began nudging Vanessa closer to the edge, a stress test of sorts. He wanted to see where she would break. Under the pressure to cut another tie, under a demand to surrender an imaginary harmless proof, or under a warning that a third party had heard. He didn't need to shout. He simply shifted the markers of reassurance, and before she realized it, Vanessa found herself at a vicious crossroads. Either throw everything into the fire and retell the story from the start, or continue turning herself into a mirror reflecting other people's expectations. She thought of Doug as one thinks of the shoreline before the sea encroached. She thought of Marcel as a stone that could become a step or a projectile hurled into her depths. She thought of the dealer as a candle in a cellar, bright enough to show there were snakes, not bright enough to find an exit. That night, Vanessa stood alone on the balcony where the wind returned like unanswered questions. She promised nothing to the dark, swore nothing to the stars, but she wrote one sentence on the inside of her palm. If there must be another sacrifice, next time it will not be her integrity but something that belongs to the one who turned her into a shield. She did not know where that vow would lead. She knew only that her anger was no longer a dispersed current. It had become electricity. Electricity can light a room or burn a house, depending on the first thing it touches. And somewhere below, in the rustle of leaves and the footsteps of the night guard, someone had already heard the quickened beat of a heart making a decision. No one knew whose table that decision would land on first, Joey's or Vanessa's, Marcel's or the dealer's. Only that from this moment on, every step would leave a longer, deeper mark, and every breath would hang a trace of smoke like a reminder that secrets never die. They only change homes from person to person, until they find someone ruthless enough to put down the final period. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. All the content I make is just speculation and personal sharing. If you find the video interesting and useful, please support me with a like and leave a comment. If you have better ideas or more interesting speculations, please share them in the comments section for everyone to discuss. I appreciate all your contributions and support. Sincerely, thank you.